Hey everybody. I'm sure you've had an uncomfortable 24 hours since you heard that I wasn't feeling well. You've probably been very worried about me. How am I doing? Am I doing okay? Well, don't worry. I'm on the mend. Although if there's any gaps or kind of odd breaks in this screencast, that's probably because I threw up and then I went back and edited me vomiting out of the video as to not, offend you. All right, let's get going. So if we scroll on down our schedule page, you'll see I just created a entry here for the last kind of 3 weeks of our class, or it's more or less 2.5 weeks. The end of this week, next week, and then the week that goes through the end of final, or I'm sorry, the half week that goes through the end of finals week. But we'll just refer to that as weeks 14, 15, and 16, even though it's actually only 2 weeks there. So let's take a look at the first item on our notes page, and this is just finishing up some old business, more or less, finishing and submitting Project 3. So again, you wrote a draft of Project 3 about a week and a day ago, or about a week ago, and the rough drafts for that project are due sometime. Or I'm sorry, we're due by 5 p.m. today, and then the final draft is due 5 p.m. next Wednesday. So just to make sure we're on the same page, let's talk about submitting that draft, and then a couple of words about the reflection I'm going to ask you to write, much like you wrote a reflection for Project 2. So here we go. So again, the final drafts are due before 5 p.m. Wednesday, December 12th, right? So all you want to do there again is just email that to me, and you're going to email your reflection to me as well. Now, in addition to thinking about kind of the usual things you might be considering when you're revising, as well as the specific feedback you received from your rough draft workshops, or the rough draft workshop, and I was happy to hear that many of you, not all of you, but that many of you did mention in your reflections that you found the rough draft feedback from your peers extremely helpful, and I did try to make that a larger part of the class because it seemed like people benefited from it the first time around. So I was very happy to see that people are finding it useful. But anyway, in addition to that stuff, here's 3 questions you might want to ask yourself. And you might have guessed that these are things I was concerned about if you paid attention to the questions that were part of the rough draft review. I wanted to make sure that even though I think we all have a pretty good idea of what a genre is now from looking at or from completing Project 1, the meme genre analysis, I think we kind of know how to do an evaluation, or we talked a little bit about evaluation as a stasis argument when we did Project 2 and we read those short chapters on evaluation, proposal, rebuttal, and so forth arguments. But I wanted to make sure that we thought about all the different factors of this assignment and how they relate together. So number one is the easy one. Now, did you really focus on a genre in the project? Is it clear that the fundamental focus of this project is identifying a genre, analyzing it, right? And then focusing on its core constitutive features. If you think back again to Project 1, we talked at length about what are the features of a particular category of written or oral or visual communication that make it recognizable as a genre. So much like we did that in relation to particular subgenres of memes, here you're asked to do it in relation to kind of a larger genre, or one that's, I guess, much more loosely defined as far as what you're able to take up. You could pick whatever kind of genre you wanted, but you're kind of doing the same work, identifying what are its constitutive features. Then number two, did you think about the different audiences for that genre, right? So what are the multiple audiences for that particular genre, and how might those different audiences use instances of the genre differently? And by instances, I just mean acts of communication that would be categorized within that genre, much like all the different memes you took up were instances of the genre of meme. So to give you 2 examples, and here I'll just reference 2 papers from 2 of your colleagues who I've talked to a little bit about their projects in the last couple of weeks. One of them was writing on sports statistics. So that's a genre, right? We can recognize what are the core constitutive features of statistics that are released in relation to sports, but there's a lot of different audiences that use statistics. These would include, coaches, this would include athletes themselves. This would include sports journalists. It would include people who bet on sports games. If it's, for instance, say, sports statistics in football, these statistics will be used by fantasy football leagues in addition to real football leagues. So they're all different audiences that are going to use instances of that genre in different ways. Another one of you is writing about secondary kind of academic journal publications within a particular field. So one audience for that genre are other academics in that field that also produce that research. But it also might be read by government entities, because this is current research on a particular issue that might be of interest to something like the Environmental Protection Authority, for instance. or some other kind of agency that needs to be informed of what is particular research in a certain area. It's also a genre that's used often by students who may be assigned to do those readings in a higher education course that they're taking, and all those audiences are going to use it differently. So number one, did you make sure you analyze the genre? Number two, did you identify the different audiences that use the genre and how they might use it differently? And then finally, bringing those things together, have you gone beyond analysis? We talked a lot about the difference between analysis and identification, or sorry, analysis and critique, to actually critique the genre, right? So not just an analysis, but also a critique of it, one that makes evaluations, or as your book refers to it, judgments of the strengths and weaknesses of that genre in regard to those different audiences. So let's make sure those three things are in there. As I mentioned, if you were paying attention to the questions for the rough draft workshop, that you answered in relation to your peers' questions, you'll see a lot of them kind of focused on that. Did we know what the multiple audiences were? Did we know it was a critique and not just an analysis, but did it also have an analysis as part of it, as kind of the build-up to the critique? So you had your peers look at that, but let's maybe want to think about those questions in relation to your own paper as you're making your final revisions to it, and again, turn it in before 5 p.m. this Wednesday. Now, just a couple of words about the reflection for that assignment, too. Now, I just want you to follow the directions we had for the reflection for Project 2. So we have the same description of this part of the assignment here. But here's one important difference. Now, last time I gave you 1 point for successfully completing your reflection. Here you're going to earn 5 points for completing your reflection. So why the big jump in point value? Well, again, people who've been paying attention to these different responses we've been writing for some of the shorter assignments early on, you might notice that we had 10 points allotted in our syllabus for all of those. We've only used up to this point 5 of them, and the semester's almost over, so we kind of have these 5 extra points. So as an early Christmas present to you, I'm just going to attach those 5 points to your ungraded reflection for Project 3. So as long as you turn in the reflection with that project, and you follow the directions for it, you'll get a very easy 5 points out of that. But one quick word again on that reflection. As mentioned here, I was generally pleased with how everyone did with that reflection. And if I wasn't, I mentioned that in my evaluation of your project. I said something for almost all of you about your reflection as well. There's one thing I think we could improve on. Now basically a reflection, let's take maybe a quick look here at those directions for writing a reflection. You can see the reflection kind of has 2 major objectives. One is when you're going to be talking about how you demonstrated, well let's see, so one of the things is you talking about your process of writing and how you composed the paper and what you thought you did well and what you thought you did wrong. And I think most everybody did a really good job with that part. What I think some people could do a little bit better with is this first part here under content, right? How in writing your drafts you learn to demonstrate the learning objectives for the course, right? So again, these learning objectives are just those principles listed under these 4 categories in the syllabus to our course, and they're also listed here in the directions for the reflection. And what I'm looking for here is maybe just more concrete or specific references to them, right? So if, for instance, you felt like you had to look at various different rhetorical situations in reference to the different audiences that might be using the genre you're critiquing, then write about that. Use words like rhetorical situation, right? As it's mentioned in the learning objectives, or if you did research, talk about that, or talk about rhetorical strategies, or talk about obviously genre would be an important one here, because I want you to be thinking that specifically about the learning objectives, to be able to identify kind of the specific language in the learning objectives and how you demonstrated your achievement of those identified objectives in writing your paper. So maybe a little more concentration on that would be useful. Other than that, again, just attach in an email to me a Word document with Project 3. In the same email, just put in your reflection and we'll be good for Project 3. Make sense? All right, onward to Project 4.